When frame wars aren't enough for TASers, the dawn of the cycle war has started over Pokemon Red Any percent. Pokemon Red Any percent is notoriously one of the glitchiest categories in speedrunning, except for maybe the 0.0 something second Super Mario Bros. 3 run, where you just throw thousands of inputs to the controller and it breaks the whole game and you go to the end. In Pokemon Red Any percent, the save data is corrupted the moment you gain control of your character. When you reload the game after powering off in the middle of the save and corrupting the save data, the corrupted items in Pokemon can be used to warp to the Hall of Fame. MrWint's Red Any percent TAS has stood the test of time. In 2020, Enterprinter discovered that changing palettes on the GBA can help find faster trainer IDs than were originally used in this Red Any percent TAS. This one, time looks faster only because the Game Boy Color BIOS screen, where it says Nintendo that we were just on here, was not shown during that movie. So it says 109 there because the BIOS was not shown during those older movies. But in 2020, Enterprinter discovered that when you change palettes, that can add additional ways to find faster trainer IDs, which are critical for any percent TASes. And he saved 7 frames in this submission on June 6, 2020, 6 years after MrWint's last update to Red Any percent, which MrWint's was the 8th Red Any percent TAS to be published. So there was already a massive frame war that had been going on for years over Red Any percent. 8 is a lot of TASes of a game to be published. It's a lot of updates. So let's go to Red and see why this new find with changing palettes during the BIOS and having the BIOS be part of the movie and not cut out from the start is important. So we have BizHawk here, and if we go back to frame 0 and play it back, you can see there's an input there which makes our BIOS blue, and then it turns it gray and then purple. And some of that might lose time, but the time is the fastest way known, combined with these inputs, 1, 2, and an input there, getting through the start screen, and an input there on New Game. All of those inputs combined are the fastest way to get through to New Game with a trainer ID that can be used for the any percent glitching, because we need to be able to write code with the trainer ID, not just get a fast one, not just get through the intro quickly, but on those specific frames delay in a way that gets us one of those code trainer IDs, specific code. So this palette sequence acts as a 5th place. There used to be 4 inputs, 2 on the credits back here where we saw that like series of weird looking inputs. There's 2 here, and then there's the one on the title screen. It might not show up in the emulator, it might be like a subframe input. But then you can see the one here again on New Game. And those were historically the 4 places where you could change things to set up the trainer ID, but now the palettes are a 5th place where you can change things to create different RNG, different amount of time the console has been on from boot up causes different RNG, and then get us exactly the trainer ID and therefore the code that we need as fast as possible. So this is very important for Alyosha's submission, and this submission here was a 115.71. So it looks slower because of the addition of the BIOS, but if you count the BIOS time in the old submission, it's faster. Now, the day after Alyosha's submission, if we go into the forum here, we'll see exactly when it happened. Thunderax on June 9, 2 months ago, said, hey, what if we bot looking for the trainer IDs instead of by frames, by cycles? See, Thunderax remembered an important timing quirk with the Game Boy. The Game Boy does not always advance in lengths of frames due to having an integrated screen. When the screen is off, the system does not have a concept of frames. There are not frames being generated, only lengths of time that the CPU is on, lengths of clock cycles. Because clock cycles are a basic unit of CPU time. And that regulates how fast it performs very small calculations or moves data. Thus, any Game Boy TAS will ultimately last not a number of frames, but really a number of clock cycles, either the length that a frame is in clock cycles or this arbitrary amount of time when there are not frames being generated while the screen is off. You can see how extreme this effect is if you look at the timing of my first TAS of Pokemon Blue Glitchless, which was supposed to be a 1 hour, 30 minute, and 3 second TAS by frame count, but in actuality, if played back on real hardware, and it has been, that TAS was a 129.53, 10 seconds faster, which is like millions and millions of cycles different, because the cycle count just is that drastically different from the frame count over the course of the whole run. There's that much untracked time. Anyway, Thunderax used this knowledge to instead search for the fastest trainer ID by clock cycles instead of by frame delays. So he would count the frame delays, but not count them as the delay, but count how much they cost to the amount of cycles that the console has been on. And that first day, he saved 364 CPU cycles on the submission. And you can see that immediately Alyosha noticed this would cause a ton of obsolescence to his movie. And though it was extremely optimal for a frame-optimized TAS, as every pass to that point had been, it would not be optimal to this level of scrutiny of these cycles. So, 3 weeks later, CasualPokePlayer finished checking the cycle lengths of all the different possible variations, of inputs that you can use through palettes, through the credits, through the title screen, and through New Game, the 5 points. He looked at all the different inputs you can do, timed them by cycle, and checked if they got the correct, first checked if they got the correct code trainer ID to execute code to get to the Hall of Fame. And if they got that, then he would record the clock cycle length that it took to get that ID. And he submitted a new TAS. It looks a bit slower here at first when it was submitted at 115.74, but it's since been replaced with several improvements. And Alyosha also realized when CasualPokePlayer submitted this that he could use his emulator SubGB Hawk to further improve the time. Because if we look again here in the submission, Alyosha found that the submission should be able to save additional time by hard resetting at a specific point in the save corruption. So save corruption, typically you would just do that on like a frame, and it would be done in the middle of the frame or something to that effect, and instead you can actually do it by a specific number of cycles. Like the first cycle, when the corruption has happened the way we need it to, we can hit the power button. Because the power button isn't tied to anything the console's doing. You can hit the power button anytime. So SubGBHawk had been created as a tasking emulator for advanced users doing play-arounds. And a famous example of this is the Yellow Ace movie. MrWint, Yellow Ace. This famous movie from MrWint used arbitrary code execution to play video in Pokemon Yellow, play arbitrary video. So it was spewing inputs, but the inputs were actually creating video on the screen. So that was the point of SubGBHawk being created, allowing you to do these precise thousands of inputs per frame. But he used it instead in this case to optimize an actual TAS, a tool-assisted speedrun, and not a super play or play around like the Yellow Ace movie was. And he found the first cycle where the corruption has happened and you can press the power button in real time and you will be able to reboot the game with save corruption having happened the way you need it to. After Alyosha found that subframe input for the power off and on sequence, CasualPokePlayer then also found an additional 12 cycle improvement in this series of forum posts, and now we have not a 1:15.74, but a final time of, let's see if I'll have to check this, 317,487,861 CPU cycles, which came out to a minute 15 seconds 0.69. Now that's a nice cycle war. So to commemorate this first ever TAS that has been so optimized that we have to track it not by frames, but by the exact amount of time the console's CPU has been on in clock cycles, let's play it back and watch. So there's that new palette trick I was talking about again, where it's changing the colors in quick succession, setting up the console to be on an exact length of time for the RNG, which is determined by the console's length of time that it's been on. So it both is like an extremely fast length of time the console to be on, and gets us that code trainer ID. And of course, we still also need to have precise code for our name of our rival, not our trainer, but actually we don't need to input names. We can use both a red and a preset name for the rival in the Any TAS. So here's where the save corruption happens, and now again we use a palette because actually setting a palette period is faster than not setting a palette in terms of clock cycles, depending on the palette that you set. And now we step down, we move around some Pokemon in our glitched party, we move around some items in our glitched bag, our underflow bag, and now we move around some more Pokemon, which is basically moving the trainer ID and the player names and stuff, and rival names in specific ways, which send us to the Hall of Fame. So that is timed to the last input, a 1 minute 15 second 0.69 TAS. Pokemon are at 80%, and it's now really a collaboration between all the authors, MrWint, Alyosha, and CasualPokePlayer, and some of the work from ThunderX initially to trigger the cycle war. And if you'd like to see more of this, I have verified one of the TASes now of Red Any %, not the latest one with all this cycle improvement, but one of the TASes of Red Any % has been played back on an actual console. And the current one also can be, but we're having some issues with our conversion scripts, making it look slower than it is. So we have to optimize some of our work on our conversion scripts, making the movies work on console. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this explanation of the start of the cycle war over Pokemon Red Any %. And maybe we'll see more cycle wars in the future. Maybe not. It's not very many games optimized to the point of having to look at the CPU's cycle times. But certainly an interesting and fun adventure we will have with the Cycle Wars.